Father Sean from St. Ida's Celtic Catholic Church in Shelton, Washington. Today, talking to you a little bit differently than normal. September 1st is the feast day of one of my very favorite saints, St. Hazel. Full name Mary Hazel Zeck. She is one of our Celtic Catholic Church original saints. She is one of ours. She was a person whom I knew be in the flesh before her physical death or heavenly birthday. Angling the camera kind of strangely today and sitting at a weird angle because I want you to be able to see the photograph of her and the candle which is burning in her honor today, and the flower, the roses, which are for her because it's her feast day. She's one of my very favorite saints in the world because, as I say, I knew her. I still know her, right? She's a saint, but I knew her before she died. And I wrote a story about her to convey the spiritual truths that I knew about her. And it might seem a strange story if you're not accustomed to the type. Old medieval people and ancient Irish folk used to write stories about saints in which they sometimes wouldn't worry too much about history as we currently think of that, but would focus rather on writing a story that pulled in every element that they could come up with to express the spiritual truth that they were trying to get across. And it didn't really matter if you would see those events if you went back in a time machine. So I felt myself one day moved to write such a story about Hazel, and I'm going to read it to you. I hope you enjoy it. It will sound a little strange, maybe, because it's got all kinds of sources in medieval and pre-medieval legend, and there are some details in the story that are based on just facts and realities about Hazel and other actual people. So it's one of those little puzzle stories that you can't fully understand unless you know all the details. But on the other hand, I hope that doesn't matter. I hope that the point, the spiritual truths about Hazel's life that I came to understand, I hope that those come through in spite of all of the weird little details and whatnot. Let me give you just a very quick little rundown about Hazel so that the main lines of the story might make sense to you. She had been married and her husband died. She was a widow, and when her husband died, her life seemed to have come to an end to her. She was very depressed, very, very much living in despair and in a fog. And one day while she was sitting in her living room, probably maybe not even really knowing what day of the week it was, because you know how you get, she heard a bell ringing, a church bell. Oh, yeah, there's that empty church at the bottom of the hill. Hasn't been used for years. I wonder what's going on. Well, she had nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, so she got dressed, went down the bottom of the hill, and went into this normally empty and abandoned church and sat in one of the pews and waited for something to happen. And the first thing that happened was she heard a man's voice from the back of the church beginning the service with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want." And of course, it's kind of a trite psalm. It's everybody's favorite psalm, right? For most folk, many folk, it's the only psalm that they've ever heard. But for Hazel, it became deeply her favorite psalm because that marked the beginning of her salvation from her despair. And she became one of the first converts to, one of the first people to respond to Bishop Duane's preaching when he brought the Celtic Catholic Church back home to California from Scotland. And then the rest was history. Before I begin, I'll tell you one quick little story about her. We were in church one Sunday. St. Columba's was a tiny, tiny little church, and it was quite possible to happen that everybody would be gone except a couple of people maybe. One Sunday, it was she and I. We were it. And I was a tonsured cleric or in minor orders of some sort. So it was my job um, to distribute communion using the service of the pre-sanctified. And as I was setting up for that, I was very depressed. I was quite sad that our little church was so small, and I was sad that there was nobody else there. Well, Hazel saw me being sad, and she said to me, she said, "We're not alone." And she looked around just as you would. Nothing mystical in her eyes, nothing weird. She just looked around and said, "The saints and angels are all around us." And from that moment, I've lived my life knowing that the saints and angels are all around us. We're never alone. Um, I love Hazel for that. Anyway, here's a little story about one of those saints who's always around us. Enjoy.
Out of Egypt, a story written to celebrate a pilgrimage to St. Hazel's grave on her feast in the year of our Lord 2000 by Father Sean Lotz. When St. Joseph awoke from his dream, another dream of the angel, he awoke with a sigh. He was getting too old for this sort of thing. But he had a responsibility, and he meant to be faithful to it. He gathered together his family, son James, wife Mary, and the miracle baby Jesus, and told them to pack, get Hemar the donkey ready, and prepare to travel. They were going to Egypt. The angel had told him to take little Jesus far away, to keep him safe from crazy Herod, and had suggested Egypt. Left to himself, Joseph would have thought Syria quite far enough. But the angel meant business, so Egypt it was. The journey was long and hot and tiring for all. Almost to Egypt, but far from any town, the water ran out. It lightened the load, especially for poor Hamar, who had to carry 2 large water skins along with young Mary and her baby, but that was of little consolation. The food was almost gone, too, except for a few pieces of dry bread. Joseph had tried to plan carefully, but never having journeyed so far, he had no idea how much supplies to bring, and so little time to prepare. He stopped the party under a solitary palm tree. Things had been worse for him before, and some caravan would be along before too much longer, but it would be miserable in the meantime. At least the baby still had some food available thanks to his mother, but the mother had to be kept well fed. Mary sighed and leaned back, looking up at the palm fronds through narrow eyes. "Joseph." "Yes, my dear." "Joseph, I sure would love some of those dates I see up there. I need something to eat, for little Jesukin, you know." "How can you think of dates at a time like this? It's water we need more than anything, and there's no way I could climb that silly palm tree to get them for you anyway." "Maybe James could shimmy up the trunk." The baby, sitting at her breast, lifted his head and spoke to the tree as clearly as his mother had just spoken to Joseph. "Tree, bend down for my mother to have some of your dates." While Joseph picked dates, the young mother marveled. "Oh, Joseph, it's just like with the cherries, that time you got so angry at me when I told you I was pregnant." "Yes, dear, I guess I was a bit angry." "And he spoke from inside that time, and the tree bowed its branches. Oh, Jesus, you never have ceased to amaze me. Ever since the angel— Oh, thank you, Joseph. What a lot of dates that is. Thank you. Oh, Jesukin, do you want down? Okay, you can play a bit." "Ah, Mary, I do hope a caravan shows up soon with some water. Out in this heat, it's not good to be long without water. James, keep your eyes open." "Yes, Father." "If you see a caravan, or anybody, and they aren't coming this way, take Hemar and run after them and try to get us some water." "Of course, Father. What's the baby doing? It looks like he's trying to nail that palm tree into the ground with an invisible hammer." "Water! Oh, Joseph, look, little Jessica got us some water. Oh, Jesus, you never cease to amaze me." Sure enough, A small but steady stream of water was flowing out of a hole near the base of the palm tree, right where little Jesus had pounded his fist 3 times. Joseph and James used their cups to fill the water skins, and soon the family were on the way to Egypt again. The next evening, Joseph brought the group to a halt near some rocky hills. Mary got off the donkey and handed Jesus to her husband so she could stretch her legs. Riding a donkey all day was proving almost as tiring as walking. "James, see that rock with the stripe over there? I'll race you." And off she ran. Her stepson ran after her, laughing, and almost beat her to the goal. They ran back with a more equal start, and he outpaced her, but just barely. "No fair," he panted. "I've been walking all day. Father, we saw a cave. Do you think we can explore it?" "It is rather chilly, Joseph dear, and the wind is kicking up. It would be nice to have a quiet little cave with a little fire to keep us warm." "Well, I guess we can go look and see." So off to the cave they marched. "That's a big cave, Mary. There might be something in it." "Like a bear, Dad? Or maybe a den of robbers? Or a dragon? There might be a dragon. Dad, let's go in." "Oh, son, I don't think there would be a dragon in there, but there might be." Fire and smoke followed the sound of the dragon's roar out of the mouth of the cave, and before anyone else could move, little Jesus was on the ground and heading into the cave. Joseph's arms stopped Mary from heading in after the boy, and he barely made it into the cave ahead of James. They didn't run far before they found the baby and the dragon. The dragon didn't even seem offended at having her nose scratched by a tiny hand, and the low rumble sounded suspiciously like a purr. That night Mary had no cause to complain of the cold, nor did James once say he was bored and hoped something exciting would happen. But everyone agreed that the smell of dragon left something to be desired. Leaving the dragon the next morning was a bit tricky. He, or she, followed them out of the cave and seemed to want to go with them. The dragon couldn't get enough of the little baby who had been scratching it on the nose the night before. After several attempts at "shoo" and "stay," Mary whispered something into her ear, and the dragon finally turned away, walked off a short distance, and, with a rather clumsy-looking hop and a few mighty flaps of wings, was in the air, flying away. The family watched the dragon leave, and little Jesus waved bye-bye as he had been taught. When the dragon was out of sight, Mary suddenly remembered. "Oh, Joseph, I think we forgot Jason's little shepherd's crook in the cave. You know how he loves his toy." James ran back and found it lying on the ground. A smile of sheer delight lit up the little boy's face when the crook was given to him. He had been trying to hook the crook around the dragon's neck, but only succeeded in getting it around one of her horns. "She," says Mary. "She? The dragon? How can you tell?" "One woman knows another. She's pregnant. Didn't you see Jesus putting his hands on her belly? She's going to have a beautiful baby, or an egg, or whatever it is dragons have." It wasn't long into their day's journey when James began to get that far-away, dreamy look in his eyes. The boy was a dreamer, and he always dreamed big. "Maybe on our way back we can ask the dragon to fly us home. Wouldn't that be great, flying home on a dragon? Then the guys would believe me when I tell them I'm going to be king of Jerusalem when I grow up." "Well, son, I don't know if it would be polite to ask such a thing. And when you're king, everyone will believe you then. But what if you don't become king? I think you have to have connections." "Well, I'll be something else great. I don't know what. King's good enough for now, though." Around midday, they began to see signs of civilization. Their path met a road, and the sand gave way to grass, grazing land, probably, for sheep. And there was a well they would be passing soon. There was water nearby, and so there must be a town. They had come to Egypt at last. As they neared the well, James spotted something in the grass by the road. A cowbell! He held it under his chin and stooped over. "Moo, moo!" He swung it over his head. "Dinner's on, come and get it." He rang it in front of himself. "Unclean, unclean, leper coming through, make way." "Oh, James, dear, you shouldn't say that. God forbid you should ever become a leper." "Okay, clean, clean, make way, saint coming through, clean, clean." His father and stepmother laughed at his play, and James quit ringing the bell. In the silence, they could hear a distant voice. "Help, help, I've fallen into the well and I can't get out." Immediately, they all rushed over to see how they could help. Looking over the edge, Joseph saw that the well was not too very deep, and at the bottom was a woman. "Hold on, we'll get you out." He leaned over to see if his hand would reach her, but the well was too deep for that. "Father, perhaps if you lowered me in by my feet, I could reach her." So they tried. The boy dangled head first into the well and stretched out his hands as far as he could to grab the woman's hand, but he lacked about a foot or so to reach her. "Don't worry, we'll think of something." Joseph pulled him back, and they all fought as hard as they could. While they were busy thinking, little Jesus toddled over to the well and began banging on the stone lip with his little shepherd's crook. "Maybe I could hold Mary's feet and she could hold James's. Maybe the lady can jump, but it doesn't look like it. Maybe we can..." Little Jesus, apparently tired of banging on the well, had walked over to James and began to hit him with his crook. "Ouch!" "Jesus, you don't normally do things like that. What's gotten into you?" "Oh, his crook! Father, drop me back into the well again. Well, don't drop me, but hold me again, and I'll hold the shepherd's crook, and that will reach her." The little boy held his crook out to James with the quiet, unchildlike dignity he sometimes showed. James took the toy, and again was hanging head first into the well by his feet, and sure enough, it worked. It was a struggle, everyone holding on tightly as they could, but with a lot of grunting and groaning, the mud-covered woman was hauled up to dry ground, safe and sound. "Ugh, what a day! Thank you all so much. My name is Hazel, and I am so very glad you came along. I needed rescuing. I'm Joseph, and this is my wife Mary, and my son James, and the little one at your feet is Jesus, our baby. And it was his idea for me to use his shepherd's crook to rescue you." "Oh, well then, little Jesus," Hazel said, picking him up, "you are my savior. Thank you so much for the idea. What a fine child he is." "Thank you. He's the best a mother could hope for. He is a very special child indeed." "He's a miracle baby," began James, before being silenced by his father's glare. Some things were just too complicated to explain, and with Herod wanting the child dead, maybe not safe. "Oh, look at the donkey. Look at those eyes. What a beautiful, handsome donkey he is. What's his name?" "Well, we call him Hemar," answered Joseph. "Hemar? That's not a name. That just means donkey. He needs a real name." Hemar, whatever his name should prove to be, seemed quite happy with the idea of being named. Or maybe it was just Hazel's firm hand stroking his neck and rubbing under his chin which caused him so much pleasure. "Look at those big sad eyes. And those ears. Such a fine fellow. Oh, ugh, and look at me. Yuck, so much mud. My clothes, my legs, even my hair. I bet you can't even tell I'm a redhead with all this mud. I wonder if I could wash some of it off." Mary took her off behind a rock with her pack and a water skin. This close to town, water would not be so scarce. After a few minutes they emerged, Hazel dressed in one of Mary's blue dresses, mud-free and with hair combed. And what hair! Red as burnished copper, and curly. "Thank you, Mary, for your help and for the dress to wear. Blue is my favorite color." "I'm glad. It's mine, too." "Well, we have something in common, so we must be friends already. And we have a name in common, too. My first name is actually Mary, but everyone calls me Hazel. May I hold the baby for a while?" While Hazel held little Jesus, Mary took Joseph's arm and led him away a short distance. "Joseph, dear, do you think we could take her with us? I'm sure she's all alone in the world and could use a family for a while. Could we ask her?" "Of course. I was thinking the same thing myself. If she would like to come with us, Look at her with Jesus. She acts just like a grandmother. Hmm, he doesn't have any real grandparents anymore, so maybe he would like this woman. He certainly seems happy with her. And it would give her a chance to come up with a real name for Hamar. She seems to really like animals. So they asked, and Hazel was happy to accompany them, but only if she could help out as one of the family, and especially take care of the donkey with no name yet. So off they went to find the nearest city. By dusk they had come to a small city. There were a number of inns and way houses, but none of them had any room. "Oh, Joseph, didn't we do this once before? I think I don't want to sleep in the streets again, or in a stable. The dragon smelled bad enough. Perhaps. Look, there's a temple. The temple in Jerusalem has a courtyard where people sometimes sleep. Maybe temples in Egypt do too." "Oh, maybe so, but I don't know. I don't know if sleeping in a pagan temple is a good idea. All those false gods around." "Oh, nonsense. What false gods? You know as well as I do they're just silly statues. Let's go." With Jesus in her arms, Mary sailed majestically up the stairs of the temple as if she were the queen coming into her palace. She really amazed Joseph. He never could quite claim to understand her. So simple and shy, really gentle with everyone and everything, but sometimes she acted like the queen of the whole world. She never seemed to assert herself, but she always got what she wanted, and what she wanted was always good. She was certainly graceful and beautiful, like a fine lady, but she challenged James to races and once even to a wrestling match. She won. What choice did he have? He followed her into the heathen temple. At the top of the grand stairs was an even grander processional path with immense statues of those heathen gods on both sides. Some looked like people, but others looked like birds or cows or snakes or bugs. Ugh, just looking at them set his teeth on edge. He gripped James's arm and held him close as Mary and Jesus, ahead of them, began to walk between the statues. As the first statue on the right began to topple, Joseph let go of James and ran to Mary. He threw his arm around her and her child. The opposite statue began to rock back and forth, and then the first statue fell to the ground, flat on its cow face, broken into the stone blocks it was made of. Its partner across the way fell over them, breaking its long ibis nose into powder. Fortunately, the processional path was very wide, and the small party was in no danger from the falling stones. Mary took a few steps further. As she passed the next pair of statues, they began to totter. She lifted her head, shifted her son so he was sitting on her arms looking forward, and began to walk to the far end of the gauntlet of idols. The second pair crashed. Each statue, as mother and child passed it in turn, likewise tottered and fell. They left behind them a wake of destroyed idols. By the time they had reached the end of the corridor, a whole gaggle of pagan priests were there to meet them, looking at the remains of their statues in wild consternation. They looked at the mother and the child, quiet and serene in the midst of chaos. Here was something they did not understand. So they did what came naturally in the presence of the unknown. They fell to their faces in awe. "Oh, please get up," said Mary. "I suppose we should apologize about the statues, but really, if you worship the one true God, this sort of thing wouldn't happen. We just want somewhere to spend the night. Have you a place we can lie down?" Boom! The ground shook and dust came flying out of the temple proper. "Well, all the other animals have already fallen down. That must have been the pig god," thought Joseph. The priests looked horror-stricken and fell to their knees. "You see," said Mary, "that's what you get. Now, please, is there some place we can spend the night?" The high priest's apartment was a very nice place to spend the night indeed. "Oh, Joseph, look at this bed. Such a bed I never saw before. Even the couches are better than anything I've ever slept on." There were enough beds and couches for everyone, and even a little cradle was brought in for the child, and acolytes brought in lots of food and juice and beer and mead and bread and fruits, and even a plate of fried pork, which Joseph discreetly had removed. "Eat well, everyone. Tomorrow we're on our own." Life in an Egyptian town was hardly idyllic for a Jewish family, but it was pleasant enough. They found a small house to rent behind the home and shop of a carpenter. Naturally, Joseph was hired to help out. Mary got a job helping a weaver who needed someone to spin for him, and Hazel discovered a jeweler who needed an assistant to help him set stones and make jewelry out of fine copper and silver wire. James made friends and got to run so many races with him that even he was worn out at the end of the day. He also helped his father and sometimes his mother at their jobs, and by helping a nearby farmer with some odd jobs, brought home fresh eggs from time to time. Even little Jesus found some friends his own age, and would sometimes show up in Joseph's shop and help by picking up shavings off the floor. The little family lived busy and happy lives. Joseph worked till rather late each day, since his job did not require as much bright sunlight as the women's jobs. So by the time he got home, dinner was cooked and everyone was ready to sit around telling stories and laughing together till it was time to pray and go to bed. Hazel managed to save up a little money from her pay, and with it bought a bit of inexpensive purplish fabric. Not the costly Tyrian purple, of course, but a nice enough imitation, and began sneaking it around in a bag. Everyone knew she had it, but no one ever saw what she was making with it. She also got a bit of wood and brought it to Joseph, asking him to make a small cart on wheels to her specifications. "And what would you want such an odd thing for?" Just a smile for an answer is all he got. As the days got colder and the nights even colder, Mary announced that in 1 week it would be little Jesus' birthday. The day was a joyous and bright one. Each of the family took the day off work so they could celebrate in style. Mary wore her finest new blue dress and sang a song she had composed herself about the birth of her son, "Away in a manger." Joseph brought in some branches of holly and ivy to make the little house more cheerful. James warmed up some cider he had gotten from the farmer, and Hazel came out of the back room with a burlap sack flung over her shoulder. While everyone sang and laughed together, she reached into her sack and pulled out a little sheep on wheels. Yes, indeed. The wagon she had asked Joseph to make had been transformed into a little lamb with wheels, with a fluffy body covered in wool she had gathered off the bushes near where the sheep grazed. "See, Jasuken, you can pull her rope and she'll follow you wherever you go. And you can hook your little crook around her neck if she goes the wrong way." "Thank you," said the boy, who was now learning to talk as other children do, and not only when he was performing miracles. He immediately began to pull the little lamb around the room and made certain she didn't wander into the fire, which a dumb sheep on wheels will sometimes do if her shepherd is not careful enough. "Oh, Hazel, what a lovely little lamb for my little lamb. I'm sure Jesus will love it." "I hope so. What a good shepherd he is. He's my little shepherd too, you know, since it was his crook which rescued me from that nasty old well. And here, for the future king of Jerusalem." She reached into the sack and pulled out a purple robe and a crown made of cloth, and gave it to James. "Oh boy, now I'll look the part. Thank you, Miss Hazel." He put the robe over his shoulders and tied the crown to his head. The crown was really splendid, since she had set it with chips of pretty stones from the jeweler's floor. "Now I'm the king of Jerusalem. Make way for the king." "It is lovely, Hazel, but you know, I think the crown actually looks a bit more like the mitre that the high priest wears." "Well, mother, in that case, I'll have to grow up to be the high priest of Jerusalem. Make way for the high priest." Hazel looked at her work with a critical eye. "Oh, well, I guess you're right. But whatever you grow up to be, James, I know it will be something fine and important. And whatever you become, now you have a hat to wear on your head to keep you warm. You are a fine young man and will do something great. And for little Hemar, how about a real name? His name is Hine, which translated means look in Hebrew. I figured out that was his name because I'm always saying, Hine Hamar. That means, look, a donkey, in Hebrew. As spring was beginning to make itself known, Joseph had another dream. Pack up, we're going back. So up they packed and back they went. They checked in the well, of course, just to make sure nobody else was down there, and they spent the night with the dragon again, and Mary firmly refused to let Jesus take home one of the leopard kittens he found. They wound up in Nazareth, which seemed like a safe place to Joseph, and slowly they made a home there. Jesus grew in grace and wisdom, and they all lived in peace and contentment for a time. Joseph was the first to die, apparently while Jesus was still a boy. Jesus, being the Messiah, was illegally arrested, unfairly tried, and crucified. He didn't stay dead for long, but he rose again on the third day, and 40 days later ascended into heaven. Mary, having lost her husband and her only son, was adopted by Jesus' friend John, who watched over her until things became unsafe for the followers of Jesus. She then went with her uncle Joseph of Arimathea to Glastonbury, where she finally gave up her physical life in peace and joy. James did, in fact, become the high priest of Jerusalem, the first bishop of the city, and wore the mitre Hazel had made for him. He was killed for the name of his brother Jesus. Hine died as donkeys do, and as donkeys do, he went to heaven. It is said that he still carries Mary on his back whenever she wants a day away from her heavenly throne, and he gives rides to all the martyred holy innocents who were killed by crazy Herod when he was looking for Jesus. And Hazel? Well, she lived a quiet life, married, was widowed, and in the dank depths of her sorrow heard a bell rung by a bishop named Duane, and discovered a good shepherd who made her a part of his family. And they all lived happily ever after. Amen.